And so I want to tell you a little bit about kind of how I came to study this and a little bit about my background before we get into the content. I will say too, the slides that you have in front of you, I've adapted them just a little bit, so if they're a bit different, I apologize. I'm one of those that tinkers a lot until, I show up here. So I tried to stay mostly on that, but you'll see a little bit of change there. So I graduated from UT Austin with my PhD in interpersonal and health communication. And so what I studied there primarily was how people in close personal relationships navigated chronic illness experiences. And so this is something that I actually have been interested in since I was in middle school, which I didn't even know was an area of study back then. I was diagnosed with a chronic and invisible illness way back then. And so I've had both positive and negative experiences with social support in my personal life. And so I've always had this kind of nagging personal questions in the back of my mind about how we can be better support partners for the people around us. And so as I got into college and learned about communication studies, and then obviously into my graduate degrees, I learned more and more about that as an area of study. And so it's just been something that I've been doing lots of research about over the years, and I'm excited to share some of that with you today. I am going to focus a little bit less on chronic illness management and more about kind of healthy behavior change today. So that's kind of where I'll structure our conversations. So here's kind of where we're going to go over the next hour together. I'll first kind of talk about a rationale. So why are our interpersonal partners important to us in terms of our health? So what is the link there? I'll also talk, of course, about support seeking. What is it? What does it look like? What are the various ways that we can ask for support from people around us? I'll also try to talk a little bit about some challenges related to support seeking and provision throughout the day, because it's not all sort of black and white and it's, here's what you do and here's the outcome you're going to get. And so we'll talk a little bit about those challenges too. And I brought a case study with us today so that we can apply some of what we're talking about. So try not to just talk at you the whole time. And then we'll kind of hopefully apply that to your lives as well. Because I am a communication person, I'm going to make you talk to each other and talk to me today. So one of the first things that I thought that we could do is to think about a couple of questions and then pair up with someone near you, or you can get in threes, that's just fine. But I want you to think about what are some of the challenges you face when you're trying to make healthy behavior changes. And that could be both initiating or maintaining those. And then I also want you to think about how relational partners, that could be friends, spouse, family members, coworkers, right? How those folks either help or hinder you in trying to make those changes. And then we'll kind of share about those in just a couple. Introduce yourselves to each other.
Come on. Nice to meet you. What do you think? What do you think? So some of the challenges have been my always get on board. Change and usually over the everything and serves all the challenges you face. So it's kind of hard there.
Hi, how are you?
My other thing is, of course, and she's always like, yes, I want more, give me more. So I'm like, I'm trying to work about it, but it's just an easy
That's awesome too.
Yeah,
Actually, talking about the questions that are on the list there. So feel free to join in wherever. You're welcome.
Which was everybody else. It was like really,
Usually I just end up
yeah, usually.
Well, maybe
I have learned like not crazy, but since I'm at like more where I want to be, I'm like, oh, it's probably okay. I don't have to like that's now I'm I do worry about the words. Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, because I don't know how it is, like, what if he takes offense, or what if it's like, oh, I don't want I don't know.
Yeah.
It just seems easier to be like, sometimes it's
Yeah. And that's kind of where I am too. But I really would do something for like, again, I already had this, like I can't do this. And kind of back up more, but it's also still saying no, ability to say no, or like just not go for the steps. That's the other option I go.
Yeah.
That's my biggest reason.
Working out, so, but I do understand the importance of it, and that's like, it's important, but sometimes it's not really understood.
And that would be hard. Absolutely.
It helps also officers.
We never wrote that one. She says like to be fair, we'll go with the dog. We'll take the dog.
Yeah.
So like exactly getting up early.
That's what I'm saying, but it's
the greatest thing is like just without her presence. Okay, I'm just right, and that's especially when she's around.
there are still children.
Exactly.
When I first started, my boyfriend now, like, it's like they don't do vegetables. I was super consistent about doing it. And then eventually I was like, you know what, that's where I'm gonna always like when
Yeah.
I'll just go back. So I was kind of proud of myself for it.
Another moment to finish up and then we'll kind of chat about what you talked about.
What I did.
Yeah, I just started that. And I did that last class where I was gonna go running. We were trying to get the plane and she stayed in one day. I was like, just a small amount.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to miss. Right.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I will say is that he's really supportive and like the team does understand that. So he likes to get up early or you know his body is like I want to get up but I know that I want to make that
I told you from a couple of the groups about some of the things that you all talked about. So one of the things that we were just discussing is a challenge of time. I don't know if you all discussed that as well, but so we talked about the fact, Diane was saying that it's challenging to find time yourself, obviously, to maintain all of those good behaviors. But we also talked about the idea that it's hard for the people around us if they're supporting us in those efforts. I mean, healthy behaviors is something that should be, right? We want long-term, lifelong. And so if that's the case, then having somebody help you along the way all the time, that's a lot of effort for both people, right? The person trying to make the behavior change, but also the people in the support network as well. What are some of the things that you all talked about in terms of the challenges for making those or maintaining those behaviors, and then how maybe the people around you can help or prohibit that?
One thing we talked about was eating, snacking,
Yes.
and having partners that don't necessarily stop you, but don't necessarily, understand that you're trying to not do those things.
Good. So just having bad foods around you, maybe in the house or at work. Yesterday in our break room, we had someone brought in a cake. And all day I was like, I just want a piece of the cake. And so I had to just, every time I had to go make copies or whatever, I'm like, okay, just turn around and walk the other direction. So yeah, having the food around you, and maybe your partners aren't engaging in the same kinds of behaviors that you are. Yeah, good. Other thoughts?
Primarily when I visit China back home, my family will eat different food from mine. Of course, they cook different food, and so I gain at least 5 pounds each time I visit and have to lose when I come back. But my mom or my grandma will always say, "Don't lose weight, don't lose weight." You know? Worry about you getting unhealthy for losing
Yeah,
weight.
so you have sort of the opposite, which is like discouraging you from doing that. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I thought I heard maybe you were saying too about your in-laws not eating super healthy either. And so
Yeah.
that's something that, my parents and my in-laws, both of them are very unhealthy cookers, and I mean, the food is great, but when you're there, like, you just kind of know, I mean, I don't know if there's a vegetable without meat or butter in it, and so even if there is a vegetable, it's not usually super healthy for me. Yeah. So a lot of these challenges that we're facing are things that we're going to have to deal with, but also things that we can hopefully ask for help from others around us. And so I thought that I'd start off today just kind of talking a little bit about why our relationships are important to our health, and then I'll spend some more time, like I said, talking about that support-seeking information. So the first thing that I want to say is just that we have a lot of data to suggest that the people around us influence our health in many ways. So sort of more broadly, we know that if you have really healthy relationships, and more quality relationships, that your mortality rate, for instance, is lower, and that's even controlling for things like age and gender and socioeconomic status. So those relationships are really important to our emotional and physical health. But sort of more specifically to our conversation today, we also know, this kind of goes back to what you're saying, is that we have sort of dietary and exercise convergence, which means that we're much more likely to engage in the same kinds of behaviors as those who are most close to us. So if you especially are cohabitating with someone, so if you have a partner at home or family members, like, you're much more likely to engage in similar exercise behaviors and dietary behaviors as the people that you live with, which in some cases might be really great if you have healthy folks around you, but in other cases, it might be more challenging. So because I study this, I always feel like I have to say I also am not, a perfect example of what you should be doing all the time. My husband was a cross-country runner his whole life, so middle school, high school, and even in college. And so he is very, very healthy in terms of his exercise, but because his metabolism is super high, he does not really have to worry about what he eats, and he eats terribly. And so it's always been a challenge for us, like, how to navigate that, because I don't exercise as much as he does, and I also don't have sort of the metabolism that he does. And so for me, it's much more of a challenge. And so it's always trying to navigate, like, God, get the Girl Scout cookies out of the house or whatever. Like, how do we help each other to move closer to both of our health goals, right? And that kind of leads us to this next couple of items, which are our relational partners both facilitate and hinder the goals that we have. And so in terms of facilitating, they might help us to bolster our self-esteem. Like, they might tell us, "You can do this, you got this," and help us to feel better about ourselves. They might just inspire us based on their own commitment to their health. So in Mark's case, he just hardly ever misses a running day. He runs 3 or 4 days a week, every single week, and it's just like a thing that he does. And I've always been kind of in awe of that, because for me, it's easy when life gets busy for my health to be on the back burner, but that's always been a priority that he makes. And so just that idea that they're making that commitment can inspire us and motivate us to continue on in the right direction. But we've mentioned lots of ways that they can impede us as well. So things like not wanting to eat healthy or engage in the same kinds of behaviors that we do. They also can just not acknowledge what what progress we're making or how difficult the process is for us. And so whenever they don't quite understand what you're going through or how difficult that is, obviously that makes the support process a lot more challenging. And so I'm hopeful that today we can talk about some ways that you all can seek support from your partners and social network members to hopefully help you in navigating these experiences. So I thought that I would start just kind of with a brief definition of support seeking. So what is this? And actually I have a different definition here on my slides than what you have, but it's just the intentional communicative activity with the aim of eliciting supportive action from others. So we are intentional about our efforts to seek help, right? We need some help from someone, and so we are asking them to do that. Well, we have kind of indirect and direct ways that we can go about seeking support. So if we're thinking more direct strategies, you might really clearly describe, and also I want to mention that most of the time when we talk about seeking support, it's related to some kind of stressor. And so the stressor can be almost anything. A student has a test that they're nervous about. That could be a stressor for them. For us today, we're kind of talking about maintaining these healthy behaviors. So for a direct strategy, we would be talking really, again, directly, explicitly about what the problem is and what the request for help is. So what exactly do you want from them? And what we know from our research is that if you are engaging in those direct support seeking strategies, you're much more likely to get people to respond in more approach ways. So they're much more likely to respond and help you out. And usually the support provision is higher quality than on the flip side if you are using more indirect strategies. So indirect strategies are those things that are a little bit more uncertain. So instead of telling them exactly what the problem is, oftentimes what it looks like is complaining or venting about something. And so the person on the other end, it's not like malicious that they're not giving you good quality support, but they just don't quite know what to do. Like, do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to do something more than that? Like, what do you need from me? And so those indirect support seeking strategies, although it's not bad, it's just that we tend to see more avoidance in response to those kind of support seeking strategies. And then again, it's because it's uncertain and ambiguous. They just don't really know what to do with that. Like, how do I help you exactly? So one of the things that I thought that I would share with you is some information from a study about specifically support seeking in a healthy behavior change context. So this came from a scholar in communication studies named Mira Fowl in 2014. And she just literally interviewed people and asked them, like, when you're trying to make these changes, what are the things that you ask people to do for you? And so these are the strategies that they developed based on that study. And she's been working more recently now that she has this kind of typology about what are the impacts of those. And so that research is still forthcoming, but I thought that I would share these with you so that we can kind of talk about how helpful or unhelpful you think these might be. So I'm going to first start, I'll go a little bit out of order because I want to talk about them in the context of direct and indirect support seeking. So I'm going to start with the direct ones. And so the first one is called co-engagement. And it's a lot about what we were talking about a moment ago. It's that idea that we want our network members to participate in these exercise dieting behaviors with them. So this is a direct strategy, like, hey, I need your help in X, Y, or Z, right? I would like for you to come to this workout class with me. A lot of times people are really nervous to go to the gym by themselves for the first time. They're like, I don't know how to work the equipment, and I don't want to look silly, or I don't want people judging me. And so having somebody there with them makes them feel more comfortable. And so that co-engagement both helps them with the comfortability in starting those behaviors, but also, of course, over time, it just helps you to remain accountable as well. And so that kind of leads into our second direct request, which is the accountability request. This is a little interesting. So this we talked a little bit earlier about, which is the idea that we like people sometimes to serve as an enforcer of our health goals. And so if we don't feel like we have the discipline or willpower to do it ourselves, we might ask someone to kind of help us in doing that. This is one of those that I feel like is a little bit dicey because if you have asked someone to do that, it's also kind of face threatening, right? Like it can be embarrassing if you're out to dinner and you order nachos and they say, hey, you told me that you didn't want to order nachos, you're supposed to be eating a salad. I mean, now all of a sudden, everybody that you're at the table with is like, well, are you going to order the salad or the nachos? What are you going to do now? And so it's really a fine line about how you actually phrase those kinds of support in return. And so a lot of times the participants in this study would talk about not just enforcement, but also kind of having somebody there just to help guide them. So like and actually my best friend and I just started doing this in January. I have to say she's been a much better accountability partner to me than I've been to her. But every week we send each other pictures of us when we're like done exercising, or she lives in Houston, so we don't get to see each other here. But or we just text each other like, hey, how are things going this week? You know, just checking in with each other to see how we're moving towards the health goals that we set at the beginning of the year. Like I said, she's doing really great. I got to be better for her. But certainly that idea that you're helping remind them of their goals or enforcing them. The last type of direct in support seeking in this study was incentivizing. I thought that this was really interesting, and something that I like to do is literally asking for rewards based on your accomplishment of different health goals. And so you might say like, hey, if we reach these goals, let's schedule a spa day or whatever that might look like. I think that's really interesting to think about in the context of the workplace, especially. So if you can ask your boss to have some kind of, you know, we're all going to do like a step competition, and whoever wins, like there could be some kind of incentive, or whoever drinks the most water in this amount of time or whatever over these several weeks. So trying to find ways to incentivize people to make these behavior changes, I think is really helpful. But obviously there needs to be some reward at the end of that. So trying to figure out, you know, where you can find those rewards to support it. The other couple of strategies were more indirect. So one of them was complaining, and I kind of talked about that before, where people would kind of talk about, I just don't feel good about myself. I don't like how I look right now. I just don't feel good. I'm not feeling healthy. And so what do you think some of the goals of complaining might be? It's like, what does that do for them? Yeah, it's just kind of cathartic, right? To talk about it like, oh, I just need to kind of get this off my chest. So definitely we might want some venting. What are we hoping maybe the person on the other end says?
Support you in your complaining.
Yeah, we kind of just want some solidarity. Like, yeah, I get that. I've been there. I understand. Yeah, we just kind of want some empathy. We want some support from them to say, yes, I get it. And it's not necessarily fishing for compliments. Like that's kind of, for the most part, the participants weren't saying that because they wanted someone to go, oh no, you look fine. That really wasn't their goal. Instead, they were trying to get someone just to understand them, to let them vent about it. The last one, and I think this one's kind of interesting, and this is, I think, probably more because of how ubiquitous social media has become, but broadcasting was really that they would literally on social media or some other form inform a large group of people about what they were trying to accomplish. So why do you think they did that? How do you think that was helpful to them?
I think some people see that as, well, if people like it, then all these strangers will expect me to get this done, and so then I have to do it.
Yes, exactly. I think you're right. They really interpret it as kind of another accountability system. So if I tell everyone that I know that I'm doing this and then I don't follow through, then I look bad. It's embarrassing. So I really have to hold myself accountable. And so a lot of people would use that strategy to post, you know, I'm going to get in 3 workouts this week or whatever it would be, so that they would hold themselves accountable to that whole group of people. Whether or not everyone was paying attention to that post or not, it helped them to feel really, you know, I'm tied to that. So I also wanted to chat a little bit today about a more common sort of form of, or typology rather, of support seeking. So these are, it's a 92, it's an oldie but a goodie, still used a lot in communication studies, also in fields like psychology and sociology as well. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with this, though, is that we want to be thoughtful about who is on the receiving end of our support seeking requests. So a lot of times what we do with our partners, and I think especially when we're thinking about romantic partners, is we kind of expect them to know what we want. And we want them to be mind readers and to figure it out on their own. But the support seeking literature is really clear that we have to be more direct about it, and we need to ask them what we want. There's also a lot of literature out there about this idea of support gaps. And what that means is that sometimes the support that I'm looking for is not the kind of support that I'm given. So we have to be thinking about, who are we seeking support from? Are they actually able to give us the support, the type of support that we're looking for? So one of the things that I learned from my dissertation data, which is kind of disheartening in some ways, but the more that people were seeking support, the more burdened their partner felt, and then in return, the less quality support provision they were providing. And so we also have to be kind of thoughtful about, can we rely on one person for all of these types of support? And if not, who can we look to in other places to gain that support from, right? So the first couple of types of support seeking that I have here are the tangible and informational support. Those are typically considered action facilitating types of support because they are targeted towards the problem or stressor directly. So tangible support would be something like material assistance or monetary assistance. So what might it look like if you were asking someone for tangible support in relation to a health goal? So it'd be either something material or monetary.
Maybe your partner would like get healthy food and bring it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you're late coming home one day and they're like, great, I'll just run by and get you a salad from somewhere and have it there for you. That's awesome. Did you have something?
Seeing like you can't pay your bills and it's causing anxiety, so you ask for some help.
Yeah. Certainly that would be like, that happens. And you think about our student population, for instance, they might have to do that a lot with their parents, like, oh, strapped for cash, can you help me out? That's certainly an example of tangible support. When we're thinking about kind of healthy behaviors, it might be just something small like borrowing a yoga mat from someone, or asking for a stand-up desk at work. That one's a little bit of a bigger ask, but those are sort of tangible things that you might ask for that would be helping you towards that goal. Informational support, probably pretty, the label helps us out there. It literally is about advice or tips. And so it might be just asking people like, hey, what was that workout class like? Or, hey, I've noticed you've lost a lot of weight, or you've gotten really toned. What are the strategies that you used? And there's so much information out there. I think that's part of the problem, is that there's trying to sift through what information is helpful for each person. But certainly if you want to ask for help in terms of advice or tips, that would be more of that informational support. These last three, emotional, esteem, and network support, are considered more nurturant support. So instead of being more about targeting the problem or stressor, these are more about the person and helping them to feel better. So for instance, emotional support, I think, is generally what people think about when we say support. They automatically think about this because it's showing care and empathy. Okay? So asking someone, I just need you to understand where I'm coming from. And that would be an example of that support seeking for emotional support. Esteem support is more about your self-efficacy. Like, can you actually do this? So your ability, what would that look like if you're asking support for someone in terms of esteem support? What might you say? If you're feeling like, I don't know that I can do this, how might you seek support from someone to help you feel like, yeah, I got this?
See if someone can do it with you, whatever the
good.
task is you're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna run today unless you come with me. Like I just know I can't do it. And so they're like, yeah, you can, let's go. Good, absolutely. So it's just trying to find ways that you can make yourself feel like you have that ability. You can do this.
I think it's important to choose the right person to ask.
Yes.
So if someone is negative, they may think like, if you ask like, do you think I can do it? They'll be like, no, I don't think you can. So it's important to ask someone who has an encouraging
Yes.
personality.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we all have to be really strategic when we're thinking about who is going to be your support provider. Because my husband is really great about like tangible and informational support. Like the emotional support towards health stuff, probably not his best suit. Like one day I remember telling him, like, I just be like, I'm feeling kind of crappy. I made like the night before we had a Christmas party or something. And I was like, I wanted to be healthier. And I just like didn't follow through. I made some bad choices. And he was like, yeah, you know, and I was like, okay. I kind of just looked at him and then he was like, oh, and then he just hugged me like he was like, oh, I realized I did something that I shouldn't have. I'm like, okay. And so we have to be thoughtful about like who's going to be the most emotionally supportive if that's what you're looking for, or in terms of your esteem support. And catching them at the right time probably too is important to think about. But definitely there are other people in my life that might be more emotionally supportive in terms of my health goals or something like that. So we think about who we can target when asking for this kind of support. The last one is called network support, and this is really about community building. And I love thinking about this, especially in the workplace context. So how can we build a community to help each other in terms of our health? And so if you, I know like some departments have started walking groups together, or they all walk over to Jowers to do the workout classes together. So it's just finding not just one person, but really a network or community of people that will help you. And oftentimes when we think about this in other contexts, like in the chronic illness literature, it's kind of finding people who have similar experiences as you. So I do a lot of work with sort of more obscure or rare illnesses. And so for those people, it's really difficult to find support because it's like really no one knows what they're going through. And so fortunately, online support groups have really helped in that way because now they can connect with people across the country or world that have similar experiences in terms of their illness. And so it's all about trying to build that community of people around you. And so it might be just things like sharing contact information, like you have a really great counselor and somebody's looking for one, so you share that information with them. So it can be a lot of different ways that to help build connections between people is what network support is all about. So one last thing I'll share with you before we get to our case study is that in that study I was talking about earlier, when we asked them, tell me about how you seek support. One of the other questions that she really was curious about was, what do you do when people aren't super supportive of you? And so some of the things that they talked about were ignoring, self-restraint, and preemptive planning. So this is when people aren't helping you as much as you would like. So ignoring was more about sort of disregarding unhelpful actions or information. So a lot of the participants said that whenever they would talk to their friends or family members about their goals, they would say things like, oh yeah, sure. So it would make them feel like, oh, you just don't really believe in me, or that I'm actually going to follow through with this. And so they found themselves having to ignore those kind of unhelpful or hurtful comments from the people around them, because if they focus too much of their attention on it, then they found themselves really starting to buy into that. Like, they're right, I can't do this, I'm not going to follow through, I never do. And so trying to ignore those sort of negative comments, I think, is really important. The next couple, the self-restraint and preemptive planning, those were about trying to, so a lot of the participants talked about this tension between remaining engaged socially with the people around them, but also trying to stay on track. So for instance, my colleagues every Thursday go to happy hour. It's like a standing appointment. And it's not always easy to say, no, I'm not going to go hang out with all of you. And so how do you both hang out with your friends or coworkers, but also still remain on track and engaged in those healthy behavior choices? So a couple of things that they talked about. The first one was self-restraint. Sounds like what it, the label is what it is. They're kind of compensating for these counterproductive behaviors. So if they knew that they were going to go out to eat on Thursday, then they would make sure that the rest of the week they were really strict. Like one participant said, my significant other eats terribly, so every time I'm around them, I know that there's going to be temptation. So when I'm not around them, I'll eat very strict. I do very well, but then when I'm with them, I know that there's going to be some kind of mess up in terms of my diet. Other people, they would just try to find ways at the restaurant, for instance. So they would order their food and say, all right, waiter, please just bring me half of that and, box the rest of it up and I'll take that home for a different day. So it helped them to still remain connected socially, but also try to stay at least more on track. So I'm still ordering the nachos, but this time I'm only eating half of them. So I feel better about that. So trying to engage in some of those self-restraint behaviors. Similar to that, though, they would engage in what we call preemptive planning. And all that means is that they would try to be the planners of the social activities to try to make sure that it was healthier. So for instance, they would say, oh, if we're going to go to happy hour, let me pick the restaurant so that I can find a place that has the most healthy options on the menu. Or instead of going to happy hour, why don't we all go to Purgatory and take a hike instead, or whatever. So they would try to be kind of the coordinator or planner of the activities. So again, they could still remain social and hang out with their friends and family, but they would be doing it in a way that was healthier for them. So those were at least some of the strategies that they talked about in that study. So what I want to do now is to take a minute to kind of apply what we've been talking about. I've got a case study that I'm going to have you all read, and then I'll have you work together to answer some questions that are on the back. So let me pass this out, and then I'll read the synopsis to you. This is actually from a movie called Brittany Runs a Marathon. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's pretty great. And okay, so I'll read the synopsis for you. This is from IMDb. So, New Yorker Brittany is everybody's best friend except maybe her own. At 27, her hard-partying ways, chronic underemployment, and toxic relationships are catching up with her. But when she stops by a new doctor's office, she gets slapped with a prescription she never wanted. Get healthy. Too broke for a gym and too proud to ask for help, Britt is at a loss. Until her neighbor Catherine pushes her to lace up her Converse sneakers and run one sweaty block. The next day, she runs 2. And soon after finishing her first mile, she sets an almost unthinkable goal, running in the New York City Marathon. So the conversation that you have below is between Gretchen, who is both her best friend and roommate, and Brittany, who's the main character in the movie. And they've had some tension before this conversation because both Gretchen and Brittany are both kind of partiers. They would go out a lot together. They engage in a lot of unhealthy behaviors together. And then all of a sudden, Brittany kind of decides, ooh, I need to make a change. And so Gretchen is a social media influencer. That's kind of what she does on the side. And she's also, just to kind of put it in context, like really thin, doesn't have to worry about her exercising or eating habits in terms of the way that she looks in terms of her health. And in fact, one previous conversation, Brittany did ask her to exercise with her, and she's like, if I do that, I'm going to lose weight too quickly. And so this is kind of a follow-up conversation to that. It is almost exactly how you'll see it in the movie, although it did take out the cuss words, so I'm trying to be, on the up and up here. But so I'll have you just read through that conversation, and then on the back there are several questions, and feel free to answer those in partners or in groups. Don't feel like you have to do that all on your own. But I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll chat. Her roommate is Gretchen.
Oh, Gretchen is
Yeah,
her
Gretchen is her roommate, yes.
I don't think, how could she have solved the book? Because she's just not the right person.
Yeah, so maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my thought. Is it about you?
I know.
That you have to. Not understanding that it's not questions, challenges, she feels like she's getting judged when nothing really is saying, and she's not about her at all. She's just trying to explain, this is what I need, and this is what I get.
Or was she already asleep?
I don't really like thinking about this. It's just like a conversation.
Actually, based on what we have,
Yeah.
I really quite convincing of
Yeah.
Brittany.
Not ask for support from Christian.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's like she emotionally can't get to.
Yeah. I don't think questions like jealous too. But I think it's not just better to not have.
Right.
Right.
I don't know how she could have sought support though, because I feel
From
like
the way I see
she had already asked for support.
Right, I don't know, she is clearly, I feel like is asking.
she's not
for
happy.
specific things, right?
So she
I don't know what she can do other than I would rephrase what she says, but I mean, even that kind of go so far.
Yeah.
As far as like asking for support for someone that isn't ready with it or can't give it, can't give you a chance.
Yeah, I feel like every time that Gretchen brought it to herself, she should have just brought it to other options instead of just being like,
I don't know what happened in the
you
conversation, why she
like,
didn't
you're
suggest
saying
maybe
how
she
much
didn't have
better.
a lifestyle.
Instead of just being like,
But
no.
one thing that we can say is
My life.
Yeah.
We're not talking about yours.
be direct.
I just keep bringing it back to hers.
What? Just sit down and like. I can
What
find
she
out
is
what
willing to do.
She's like, just have a serious conversation. And see if she changes, if not, just cut off. She's just not the right person, very,
I think critical managing it in the future and probably ask for more different types of people. Rather than I can't give you specific support that I use, I can use.
I think
Different because.
She's looking at it. They're too.
Yeah, because you can't get everything from one person. But, and then I feel like the over support in the sense of like, you know, the being always.
Yeah.
I work on And it's just like constantly like,
Are you sure? Are you sure they're doing this? Doing this? And it's like, okay, you know,
changing
the way they can.
yeah, and talk, I think giving them good
Questions awful.
She kind of is the worst in the whole movie, so.
You have this more like jumping to the worst.
Right.
I don't have that as part of the conversation till like later.
Yeah, and I also think that asking about how diabetics support will be good, but that's the,
It's really terrible.
what do you ask for direct support? If you don't get it, you realize that would help you for you. Yeah, because at the end of the day.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She does her best.
she definitely needs a better support partner, for sure.
Yes. Direct support, that asking for it's the best way to get you want, because then it's also the easiest way to get it.
Yeah.
If you ask for it.
Yes.
Well, do we think we're at a place where we can chat about these questions aloud?
I do not.
Yeah.
But I can still go out.
So let's take a second to talk about each of these questions. So the first one I asked you to kind of talk about was what strategies for dealing with a non-supportive partner might be helpful. So I think I heard a lot of people feel like Gretchen is definitely not supportive. So what are some things that Brittany could have done to try to manage that non-support?
She could have suggested a different option of things to do to spend time together.
Okay,
Because
good.
it seems like that Gretchen wanted to hang out, spend time with her. And their past track record was
Good.
just go get a drink or whatever.
Right.
And instead, she could have said, hey, I can't do that, but let's go do this.
Okay, good. So maybe just reframing that a little bit to say, not that I don't want to hang out at all, it's just that we need to change the way in which we are hanging out. That's great. So maybe that preemptive planning. Good. Other thoughts?
I like, my heart goes out to Brittany and like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the camp of like, she should tell Gretchen how it is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she should just be upfront and be like, listen, I'm doing this for me, you need to respect that. So,
Right.
you know.
Did anybody put that ignoring strategy?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it doesn't, I don't know. I mean, just based on the movie, I know many of you haven't seen it, but I'm not sure how responsive Gretchen would have been really to almost anything, unfortunately. She's kind of a, she is really, I think, and I can hear you all talking about this, I think insecure in her own lifestyle choices and things like that. And so because Brittany is doing all of these things to kind of change, I think it freaks her out a lot. And so I think what was probably the most helpful and what ends up happening in the movie is Brittany ends up just kind of dissolving that friendship, and they don't end up living together after that because it really just wasn't healthy for her, you know. And she couldn't continue to try to make her life better with Gretchen in the picture. So did you all talk about some ways that either Brittany could have sought support from Gretchen or from other sources, or do something to help herself, considering how, you know, toxic that conversation was? Strategies did you talk about?
Well, we mentioned just
Yeah.
Brittany explaining to her the why behind what she was doing.
Good.
You know, why is she making these changes? You know,
Yeah.
she doesn't feel good. She's not healthy. She's sick. She's on the verge of high
Right.
blood pressure or diabetes or
Right.
whatever the doctor
Right. Her
says.
physician was like, hey, get it together. Yeah.
The doctor says if I don't do something, you know, I'm gonna get sick. I'm
Yeah.
gonna get worse. And in sharing the why, that might have helped Gretchen understand that this wasn't about just not being your
Right.
friend,
Yeah.
you know, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But she had to focus on doing something better for herself.
Good.
I think you have to find someone who's happy for your success.
Yeah.
So having this serious conversation and telling everything, and if Gretchen still is not supportive, that means she doesn't love you.
Yeah.
She's not happy for your success. So just then in that case, you have to find someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, and she ends up finding some other people that she meets like in a running group, and they end up helping her a lot throughout the process. And so I think a lot of this is about finding the right support partner or partners. And because I don't know that, like we've said, the strategy of seeking support from Gretchen, not sure what would have worked to help her be better for her. So let's talk a little bit for the last couple of minutes about you all. So what are some things that you might do in the future based on some of the things that we've talked about to seek support from others in your social network to help you? Yeah.
I remember that you need to articulate what you need.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, so be a little bit more direct in articulating what we need. That's awesome. Other thoughts?
If we aren't getting support from someone that we're seeking it from, to broaden our horizons,
Yeah.
to not just seek it from that person, to reach out to other people that may be able to give you the support.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Find your community. It doesn't have to be just one person. Absolutely. Love that. Good. Other thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I do have a feedback form for you. They have a QR code now that you can just scan and complete later. And so I was asked to have you all pass this around. It even has instructions if you don't know how to do that. So
You just
one
use
there.
you open your camera on your phone, you point at the QR code, and there's gonna be a little link that pops up. And you can do the evaluations there.
Only after that, send it like in the email.
No.
Yeah, so the first time I ever used a QR code was when I was in one of these. So it is really easy. Your phone just knows what it's doing. Oh, that's okay. I don't know if we have it on the screen or not. Oh, okay, yes. So Josh suggested maybe if you wanted to just